Okay guys, welcome to the first of our online lessons. So as you know, we're going to be working online for the next few weeks. The way I'm going to be doing most of the lessons is I'll be sending you out videos like this one, and in the video there'll be instructions for different things to be looking at, different things to be researching, studying, and different tasks that you need to complete about the topic that we're discussing. So just in order to make sure that you're ready for online learning. Now I know your Check and Connect tutors have gone through this already, alright, but we are going to be using a lesson schedule on OneNote. So if you go onto your OneNote, you will notice a new section called Lesson Schedule, and in there it will give you instructions of where to go for each of the lessons. Now most of the time what this is going to tell you to do is go onto Teams, and there will be an assignment on Teams each day of the task you need to do. This is just a kind of an easier way for me to be able to see who's engaging with the work and keeping all the work together. So we will be using Teams in nearly every lesson. What you need to make sure you're doing is at the end of each lesson you are handing in the work. Okay, so whatever work you do, so for example in today's lesson there is 3 different tasks. One of them needs to be submitted on Teams, and I'll be very clear as we go through the lesson what I wanted to submit it onto Teams. Okay, so make sure you're paying attention during the lesson, and there'll be instructions on the assignment as there is for today's lesson, which is telling you this is what I want to hand it in. That way I can have a quick look at the end of the day at what work's been done, who's been engaging with the work, and where people maybe are struggling and things maybe we need to look back on again. The videos then, so a lot of the time, like I said, we will use videos. The links, these will be posted on YouTube, and the links will be in the assignments tab on Teams. It's important that you pay close attention to the instructions in the video. Okay, I'll try and take things slowly, but also I don't want the videos to be too long. Of course, always pause and rewind whenever if you ever find that you've missed something. That's the great thing about videos. You can go back and look at what I've said and listen to it again. Alright. As with all of our other units, I have created a booklet for the unit that we're looking at today. So we're going to start with the famine. Okay, so the booklet's in the exact same place as it is all the time. So you go onto the history theme, you go into files, you go into class materials, and in there you will see a booklet called Famine Booklet. So that's the one we're going to be using for the next 2-3 weeks. Alright, so make sure you are familiar with where that is. If you are in any way confused, please send me an email and I will send the booklet onto you. I am going to attach the booklet to most of the assignments as well. Alright, so it's always going to be available to you. Make sure you are using it, and it's really important that you're using these booklets. Okay, they are designed to give you the information, the relevant information that you need, right? And they are much more useful to you than say Google will be. Finally, the last thing is that there is icons I'll be using in the videos. Okay, so you'll see them in the next few slides in this video. The icons are just there as an extra little hint of what you should be doing. Now I will always explain to you in the instructions what you should be doing, so if you are paying attention, the icons you're not going to even need to look at the icons. But if you find that you maybe missed an instruction, you're not really sure if you're doing the right thing, the icons are just there as a little hint of this is what we are doing at the moment. So there's a number of different icons, and they're very straightforward. So if you see this icon here, the eye, it means you should be reading or watching something. Okay, so there's a section I've asked you to read, or there's a video I've asked you to watch. If you see this pen icon, you should be doing some writing at that stage. If you see this brain icon, it means I want you to think in detail about something. So I've given you a question or given you a topic that I want you to just pause and think about in a good bit of detail. The ear obviously means you should be listening. This magnifying glass means I've asked you to go and research something. Okay, so this is where you should be going onto the internet or using the booklet and finding out information that that I haven't fully explained. I'm looking for you to go and find the information yourselves. If you see this purple icon, there is a question either on the screen or I've asked a question in what I've said, and I'm looking for you to find a specific answer to that question. So whenever you see this, make sure that you're answering a question. This icon here means you should be checking back on your work. So whatever work you've just completed, I'm asking you to go back and look at it again. And finally, this icon here tells you that there's an online task that I'm looking for you to complete. So there's somewhere online that I've asked you to go to, and there's something you need to do online. Now, again, these icons are just there as an extra little hint in case you've missed an instruction or you're a bit confused with what's going on. I will always give you clear instructions in the video itself, so don't be thinking that you need to go and learn these icons. They're just there as an extra little help. Okay, so we're going to actually get straight into work now. Okay, now you're going to notice down on the bottom left hand side of the screen there is an icon, and that icon means there's an online task coming up. Okay, so just an example of how we're going to be using those icons. Alright, so first task I want you to look at today, this is something we've done with a number of other units when we've started off looking at them, and that is looking at this image, and I want you to tell me, what do you see going on in this picture? Now I want specifics of the picture, so look in detail, look at at the house itself in the middle, look in the background, look behind the main house, look at the people in the front, look at what's below them, really detailed. And what I want you to do then, let's go on to menti.com, use this code that's there, so 3536839, and I want you to post 3 different words of what you notice in that picture. Now I want detailed, or specific details, okay? I try and find something really interesting that you see going on in this picture. Okay, so I want to suggest that you pause the video here for a second, have a look at it, think about those 3 questions and post the answers to Menti. So pause here and go and complete that task. Okay, so now that you've completed that task and you have submitted these 3 words to Menti, that's brilliant. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use those words it's going to create a word cloud. I'm going to look back at this at the start of the next lesson. Okay. So today the objective is what we're doing, and now you're going to see that icon at the ear, so we're listening at the moment. What we need to do is we're going to have a good knowledge of the context of the famine. So what was the world like when we come to the time of the famine? I want you to be able to draw links between the 1940s and other aspects of Irish history which we have studied. So things like 1798, the Act of Union, the life of Daniel O'Connell, all of that we can connect to the famine, and all of that is going on in the decades preceding the famine, so we want to be able to connect all these different topics that we're studying. And then finally, I want you to have a good understanding of the importance of land to the people of Ireland at this time. Okay, so the next task we're going to do, okay, and what I want you to do here is I want you to draw this timeline, so a timeline from 1750 up to 1850. And then there are 6 events that happen within that period that I want you to plot along the timeline in the correct order. Now, not all of them have the correct year given, or have the full year given. Okay, so you'll see the blue, the red, and the yellow boxes are all missing the year. So you're going to either have to use your prior knowledge or go back and do some research to find the year that is missing there. Okay, so you're drawing this into your copy, right? Plotting those 6 events, and then we'll come back and check in a few minutes. Okay, so I'm going to pause here now, and you're going to go and complete that task. Alright, excellent. So at this stage everyone should have completed this timeline. So you should have a timeline drawn in your copy, and you should have the 6 events drawn on it. Now, we should all know a lot of this already because we have studied a number of these points already. Okay, so I'm going to move on, and you're going to notice here this new icon. This is the check and reflect icon. So what I want you to do is review the work that you've done, and you're going to see how you did in terms of getting the answers here. So the first one we got is 1763, Theobald Wolfe was born. The earliest thing of these events, and it should be the first one on your timeline. Following on from that, we go to 1798 rebellion. Okay, so we're moving up 35 years there. Maybe what is the next event going along? Now it gets a bit trickier. Our third answer is the Act of Union is passed. This is passed in 1800 and came into effect in 1801. Okay, so you should have been able to, most of you will have known that already because we've talked about it quite a number of times, and if you didn't, you should have researched and found the answer there. After that, the Act of Union, we have the Catholic Emancipation, and as you know, this was achieved by Daniel O'Connell in 1829. We have the first year of the Great Hunger. So the Great Hunger is another name given to the famine, okay, and that would be in 1845. And then finally we have 1847 is the year you're looking for here, so 1847, and that is when Daniel O'Connell died on his way to meet the Pope. So you can see already that there is an overlap here between Daniel O'Connell's life and the famine, and the Great Hunger, the Great Irish Famine. You know, they did overlap. O'Connell died 2 years after famine and had made speeches in Parliament about the famine before his death. Okay, so he was still involved in politics at this time, and there is a connection between him and the famine. Okay, so well done if you got all of those right, and especially if you got those years filled in. That's just another little task, to think about what we've already known. So, in order to understand the famine, we know what's going on in the history of Ireland at the time. One of the things we really need to understand, though, is the importance of land. Now, we have mentioned this before. We looked at those documentaries about the famine before the Christmas break, and we talked about the importance of land when we looked at things like the plantation, okay, and when we looked at the Land League with Charles Stewart Parnell, which came after the famine. But land has always been really, really important to people in Ireland. Land ownership has always been a symbol of wealth, and it's always been something that people have sought for. It's been probably even more so after the famine, because of what happens here due to a lack of land. But in Ireland, we have a number of different people, and they all different social classes, and all of this is related to land. So at the top of our social ladder, the people who are the richest, the people who have the most power and the most control, are the landlords. Okay, now these landlords, a lot of them are people who are descended directly from the plantations, and this is where their land came from. And their ancestors were people who came over in plantation, were given land, and the land is still in their families. So these landlords own the vast majority of the land in Ireland, but there's not a huge amount of landlords. And if you're a landlord, you're very, very wealthy, and you're probably not going to be spending a huge amount of your time working on the land and using the land. So in order to make money from this huge amounts of land that they own, they rent out their land. And this goes down to the tenant farmers. So these are the second tier in society in Ireland. Now, most of the tenant farmers are quite poor, but there are quite wealthy ones as well. So we have two types of tenant farmers. We have large tenant farmers, who are farmers who can rent over 30 acres of land. So quite a big plot of land for the time. And they are working this land, and they are in charge of this land. But if you're holding 30 acres of land at a time, you're quite wealthy. Then we have smaller tenant farmers, and these are people who have between 5 and 30 acres of land, usually between 5 and 10, but anywhere between 5 and 30, and you are considered a smaller tenant farmer. Now, if you're a tenant farmer, you are dealing directly with the landlord, so you're getting your land directly from the landlord, and you are paying the landlord back by working on his land. So you're given your section of land, and and you're working it, and you're giving the crops to the landlord, a certain amount of crops every year that you produce for the landlord, and that is going to pay your rent. Okay, so landlords at the top own all the land. They rent out their land to the tenant farmers. Now, if you're a tenant farmer, however, and you have 30 acres, one farmer is not going to be able to take care of 30 acres by themselves. So they need to get some more people working on their land for them. Right? And there's two different groups that work for people, that work for the tenant farmers. The first group is the cottiers. So cottiers are people who lived on 1 acre of land or less, and on this land they had to build their house. Usually the type of house was called a hovel. It was built of mud and sticks. It was very, very small, 1 room, no windows, thatched roof, with maybe 10 to 15 people could easily be living in one of these hovels. 3 generations, so you might, as an adult, be living with your own family, so your children, your partner, and your own parents. So you have the grandparents, the parents, and the children, all living in a tiny hovel, a single house. So the cottiers were people who had 1 acre of land, On this land they had to build their house, and they also had to grow the food for their family. And the food that they always grew was potatoes, because potatoes didn't need a huge amount of work. They grew very much by themselves. You just planted them, you left them, and they grew quite well, even in very bad lands. So even though the land that these cottagers were given wasn't the best quality land, they could grow potatoes within it. But in order to pay the rent for this land, they had to spend a huge amount of their time working for the tenant farmers. Okay, so working on the tenant farmers' lands, which would then also be lands belonging to the landlords. Okay, so the cottagers aren't working directly for the landlords, but the work that they are completing is still being used to pay the rent that is going towards the landlords. So the cottagers are spending most of their time out working on land, producing crops that they will never actually get to use, and when they come home they don't really have time or energy to be growing their own food, and that's why they are so reliant on potatoes. Now, when we get to the time of famine, there are 1 million people working as cottager farmers. That is 1 million farmers, right? People working as this, and there is an estimated 4 million people if you include all of their families. So if you just include the working people, so the working people out actually being cottagers, so working on the land, so you're talking about men and women who are in the working age, you were talking about 1 million people. But if you include their entire families, so the amount of people who are living this type of life on tiny plots of land in these terrible living conditions, you get that number up to 4 million people. So a huge amount of people living this lifestyle in Ireland. The final group then we have is landless labourers, and these are people who tend again to live in hovels, but they don't actually own the land or have any rights to the lands they're living in. They may be renting apartments in a town, or they're living in a very small kind of shack or hovel outside of a town, places where it's just spare land not being used, and they just set up and they kind of live there. A lot of times these wouldn't have any real sense of a home, and they wouldn't usually have huge families. And these are the poorest people in Irish society, and they very much they need to be working in order to make, and they get paid in food. Okay, so money and what we would consider cash money would not be a huge thing at the time. People are working for their food, get paid directly in food. Rent is paid in crops, and the crops are then sold by the higher up people, by the landlords, to make money. Now, if you're a tenant farmer, obviously you have a bit more land. You might be okay for a while. If maybe your crops don't grow too well, you probably have a bit of land to keep some animals on. But if you're a cottager, you only have a very small amount of land. If your crop doesn't grow, you're going to be in trouble. You may be able to have 1 or 2 animals, but you're not going to have in 1 acre a huge herd of cattle or pigs or anything like that. You're mainly reliant on potatoes. If you're a landless labourer, you don't have any land. If you can't work, you can't eat. Okay, so these are the 4 different groups working the land in Ireland, and it's really important that you're aware of all 4, and especially those cottagers. They are very much going to be affected by the famine. Okay, so what I want you to do, and this is the final task for today's lesson, is I'm going to ask you to open up the famine booklet. Okay, so the booklet on the famine, so again this is attached to this lesson, or you can find it in Teams Files Class Materials. I want you to read the first 2 sections. Okay, so the first section is about context, so just to go back over what we looked at the start of the lesson, and the second section is about the land. So you can stop reading when you get to the section about the causes. So just going to the first 2 sections. And what I want you to do then is answer these 7 questions. So this is your main task for today. You can write these answers either typing them out on your iPads, or you can write them in your copy and then take a picture. And this is the work that I want submitted. So you have 7 questions to answer. So question 1, what was the population of Ireland in 1841? Quick little sentence. So the population of Ireland in 1841 was blank. Full sentence, please. Question 2, who owned most of the land in Ireland? Question 3, how much land did you need to rent to be considered a large farmer, or large tenant farmer, that should say. Question 4, explain the difference between a small tenant farmer and a cottager. Question 5, what was a hovel, and roughly how many people lived as cottagers in Ireland at the start of the famine. Question 6, were there any people who were poorer than the cottagers? So all of those are questions that can be answered through those first 2 sections and through what I was talking about in the last few minutes. Finally, question 7 is asking you to look at this source, which is on the slide here in front of you. This source is also in the booklet, so please, if you can't read it here on the video, use the booklet to answer this. Right? And I want you to tell me, read the source about the lives of cottagers. What do we learn about the life and work of the cottagers from this source? So all those questions please answered, written out, take a picture and submit it, and make sure you put attach and hand in on the assignment. Okay, so best of luck with the work, and I will speak to you again tomorrow. Okay, and thanks for listening.